Audience discretion is advised due to potentially distressing and sensitive material. John Jamilski was born on May 9, 1935. As a child, he was very quiet and barely spoke to anyone. He liked history but hated math and steered clear of all things sport-related. Though with all the awkwardness, he did eventually graduate from university with a degree in watchmaking. His father was also a watchmaker. Jamilski married Dorothy Richmond, a schoolteacher, in September 1959. They had 3 sons together, but sadly they lost their firstborn when he was only an infant. Jamilski and his fast-growing family resided in a 3-bedroom home at High Bridge Road in New York. Later on in life, Dorothy became ill and bedridden, and eventually lost her life in 1999 after 11 years of being sick. In 1988, he convinced his father to invest in stocks, and after his passing, Jamilski inherited a lot of money which he invested in real estate in California and Nevada. This decision ultimately made him a millionaire by 2000. Now you'd expect him to relax and take a break after all he's been through, but Jamilski, despite all the wealth, carried on living an extremely simple life, even a below average one. He continued working at markets and grocery stores and also worked as a carpenter and handyman. He was often spotted by his neighbors collecting cans and bottles from trash cans for extra cash. He even went as far as making some sort of arrangement with libraries to save coupons from old magazines for him. Basically, he collected junk, cans and bottles which covered his whole house in addition to other stuff. This is something you need to remember. But this is where today's case really takes place. In October 1988, still married to a sick, bedridden woman, Jamilski was driving around when he spots a 14-year-old Native American girl. It was late at night and Kristen, the girl, was hanging out with friends trying to catch her ride to another friend's house. Jamilski pulls to the side of the street and asks if he can give her a ride somewhere. Kristen's friends tell her that the whole thing is creepy and she shouldn't get into the car with a stranger. But Kristen gets in anyway, thinking that this is an old man who's giving her grandfather vibes. Based on an interview, she wakes up 3 days later, not remembering anything after she got into the car. So she assumes she was drugged. It was dark, cold, and all her clothes were removed. She was completely naked. She was chained and violated every single day from then on. Jamilski later moved her to the infamous dungeon where he kept all his later victims. Yes, this won't be the last time he did this. Again, Kristen doesn't remember how she was moved to the dungeon. To make her do what he wanted, Jamilski showed her pictures of her brother, her family, and her house. Honestly, anyone in her place would feel scared and threatened and would give in to whatever sick game he wanted to play. Seeing the pictures and it sinking in that he knows where she lives and who her family is, she starts obeying him and stops fighting back when he tried to sexually assault her. To cover all bases, Jamilski makes her write letters to her family saying that she's simply run away, but she's safe, and he would mail them from different places to give the impression that she's on the move and they shouldn't even bother go looking for her. Later, Kristen said that all his talk about him hurting her family aside, there was a combination lock on the door and she figured even if she did manage to kill him somehow, she'd be stuck there in a basement with a dead body. So this is what her days looked like. She was cold, naked, and couldn't leave the dungeon. She was violated every single day, and he only fed her once a day, her meals consisting of crackers, water, and Kool-Aid. She doesn't remember much about her experience, and hey, who could blame her? But later, it was said that Jamilski built the dungeon just cause Kristen had asked him for more space. It was also said that Kristen was the girl in the chilling videos which were released after this whole ordeal. In these videos, you can see Kristen dancing and exercising with Jamilski, and pleading with whoever is watching that it would be better for everyone if she was at home with her own family.
Peace out. Peace out. Word up. Word up on the strength, huh? On the strength. Talk about school, cause man, I gotta go to school. I can't wait to see my mom. How bad? I miss her. What do you guys want to see? There ain't nothing to do down here. It's too boring. You realize if I was at home, I could be doing 10 million things right now, and then I'm here. But I'm here and I can't do nothing. So please, please, be fast. Please.
One of the disturbing things to know is that Jamilski refused to wear a condom when violating her, even though he was asked to wear one, and he kept telling her that, no, no, don't worry, I get tested all the time. One day, he simply blindfolded Kristen and dropped her off at the airport and just drove off. The second he drove away and it sank in that she was free to go, Kristen bolted into the airport and found her way back to her family. She never reported to the authorities and never told anyone about the hell she went through because of all the trauma she'd experienced. By the time she was released, Kristen had turned 17. He kept her for more than 2 years of her life. But sadly, this would only be the beginning of Jamilski's 15-year reign of terror. In 1995, so 5 years after Kristen, give or take, he abducts a 14-year-old Latino runaway under the false pretenses of wanting her to deliver a secret package in exchange for some money. Michelle willingly walks into the dungeon Jamilski had built in the basement of his house for the sole purpose of kidnapping, torturing, and violating his victims. After putting Michelle through the same hell as Kristen, he released her in 1997, after 2 years, when he drops her off at her mother's house blindfolded. Although Jamilski had threatened to hurt her family if she ever told anyone about her abduction, she went to the police, gave them a description, and relayed what had happened to her. But the police refused to believe her on the grounds of her past drug problems, and they dropped the investigation before it went anywhere. Some sources say that Michelle decided to keep quiet about the whole thing and never went to the authorities because her family claimed that Jamilski was seen driving past their house for weeks after she was released. Tina, a 53-year-old Vietnamese woman, was kidnapped off the street in 1997. Jamilski forced her into the car, took her to an abandoned house, and violated her. Then he drove her to his own house and kept her in his dungeon for a whole year. Again, Tina went through the same thing as his previous victims. As reported, he unexpectedly blindfolded her and dropped her off at Greyhound bus station with $50. Unlike his previous victims, she was a grown woman and she reported to the police right away. But the police dismissed her. On top of that, they accused her of making the whole thing up. The sad thing is that some say they didn't even attempt to follow the lead because Tina didn't speak English very well. She was a foreign refugee. His fourth victim was Jennifer, a 26-year-old white mother of two who was walking from one friend's house to another when she found herself in a bad neighborhood with a bunch of guys following her. She was drunk and felt unsafe, so she decided to catch a ride from a nice old man who apparently noticed she was scared and in trouble. Sadly, Jennifer had no way of knowing that it would have probably been safer if she stayed on the street. She gets in, and the man starts talking to her, distracting her from her surroundings. The car suddenly comes to a stop in a garage, and Jennifer asks where they are and why they are there. But Jamelski simply replies that this is his place and he needs to grab something from his house before he can drop her off at her house and runs inside. Jennifer tries to get out of the car but she can't, and this is all she remembers. Once again, Jamelski's victim wakes up in a cold, dark room, naked. This time, Jamelski fills Jennifer's head with stories of being part of a human trafficking ring, and tells her that the police are in on it and she has nowhere to run. She tries to put up a fight when Jamelski violates her, but he starts burning her with secrets every time she does, and tells her that for each time she doesn't give in to his requests, this would add on to the time he was going to keep her there.
Like, well, every time that you don't have sex with me, it adds on to the time that you're here. And I said, oh, so I will be going home. And he said, yeah, whenever my bosses say you can leave.
She was also fed once a day, but she could order whatever she wanted. She wasn't allowed upstairs, but she had a TV in the dungeon and could spend her days watching shows when he wasn't around. Like with the previous victims, Jamelski comes down to the dungeon one day and throws her the clothes she was wearing when he abducted her, blindfolds her, and drives her to her mother's house. Jennifer says when she got out of the car, she was so happy that she was breathing actual air, which is absolutely heart-wrenching. After she walks into the house, Jennifer tells her mother everything, and her mother prompted her to alert the authorities. She provided them with all the information she could remember: his appearance, the room in which she was kept, the writings on the wall, his car, but the investigation came to a halt because Jennifer didn't get the model of the car right. In 2002, Jamelski spotted a 16-year-old African-American runaway named Micah. He did the same thing to Micah that he'd done to his previous victims, but unlike the others, she managed to befriend him and formed such a bond with him that she was even allowed upstairs. Keep in mind that by this point, Jamelski's wife had already passed away, and I guess this made the whole operation easier for him and gave him a certain extent of freedom. He even felt confident enough to take her out in public. He took her bowling and even to a karaoke bar where people noticed how weird the whole dynamic was. But it wasn't enough to alert anyone that something illegal and sick was going on. People reported that while Micah was singing, Jamelski stood right behind her, not singing himself, but keeping a close eye on her. And what would you expect? His victim was holding a microphone in a packed bar. 'Cause he was already used to taking Micah out, one day when he was going to the bottle return center, he took her along for the ride. When they got there, she convinced him to let her use the phone to call the local church and ask for their service times. She slipped away, but instead of calling the church, she called her older sister and desperately told her that she's been kidnapped and violated and needed help. Then she hung up. Her sister called the number right back and an employee picked up. Micah's sister pleaded with her to call 911. The employee called her boss, who in return alerted the police. Jamelski was finally arrested. After his arrest, Jamelski stated that he didn't believe he had to be punished, and thought he would spend a couple of days in jail or would have to pay a fine or do some community service. His lawyers had to spend days making it clear to him that taking women and holding them in a dungeon against their will is kidnapping.
So how do you think you'd feel if you were 15 years old and you were locked at your house in that room for a year?
I would not mind living down there in that dungeon. It was absolutely beautiful. There was a bed. There was water.
And you say everything a girl could want in that dungeon?
Anything that they wanted, except leaving at certain times, was there.
Well, in any state I've been, that's called kidnapping.
That's what I understand the law says.
And you're a smart guy, and you didn't think that you were kidnapping these women?
No.
You seem very coherent, but what you're saying sounds absolutely insane.
If you want to phrase it that way, you can.
After he was taken into custody, the dungeon was turned upside down by the authorities. This dungeon was basically a basement which led to a bunker, and you had to get on your hands and knees to actually get to. It was a room 8 feet high, 24 feet long, and 12 feet wide. Here he would tie his victims to a chain that connected to an ankle bracelet. There was a stained bathtub in the middle of the room, where the victims were forced to bathe themselves using a garden hose. though the water had nowhere to go and it would just stay on the floor until it evaporated, which made the room moldy and damp. For a toilet, there was a chair frame with no seat. On the walls, there were the words "Wall of Thugs" and "Peace to all who enter here," which are burned into the victims' minds forever. Jomelsky had in his possession calendars in which the victims were forced to record the events of the day, and the days were marked with the letters S, B, and T, which stood for sex, not sexual abuse or violation, bathe, and brush teeth. This is a whole new level of disturbing, truly. This was in addition to the videos of Kristen, which she has no recollection of. The eccentric millionaire targeted women from different races who he thought wouldn't be missed, like runaways, ranging from 14 to 53 years of age. He drove around looking for potential victims. This, interestingly, all started when his wife got bedridden, which could have triggered him to carry out all these heinous crimes. John Jomelsky had no sexual contact with his victims days prior to their release, which makes you think the grandfather knew more about the crimes he was committing than he let on, pretending that he had no idea kidnapping, torturing, and violating women was a crime, and he would get away with it with a slap on the wrist.
It's basically, what do you call adultery? So anyway.
But when you go to someone who's underage, it's not called adultery, it's called sexual assault.
Now I find that out. I had no idea.
Oh, come on.
I never hurt anyone physically.
Chaining them up and keeping them in that room isn't hurting somebody?
People wear ankle bracelets all day long.
It's not jewelry, John. Come on. You chain them to the floor.
Okay. It didn't hurt them. A half an hour or an hour after I took them off, they were fine.
He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree kidnapping and is currently housed in Mohawk Correctional Facility, serving a term of 18 years to life. He's 88 right now. He's been denied parole twice so far, once in December 2020 and once in December 2022. Part of his plea agreement was for all his possessions to be sold off and divided between the 5 victims.